This video is brought to you by America First Insight. Help support the growing conservative movement by becoming a member today. And if you want to support this channel, you can also use the code REAL when becoming a member. Thank you and enjoy the video. As everyone knows, a couple days ago, Virginia Democrats got a significant win in the redistricting referendum, as Virginia voters approved a new congressional map that would give Democrats up to 4 extra seats for 2026. And let's be clear, this was a big victory for Democrats. I'm not trying to spin this and say, no, this was secretly a win for the GOP or whatever. Guys, it was a win for Democrats. I want to be clear about that. A win is a win. But at the same time, I would argue that even though Democrats did win this referendum, the more you look at the results and the full context surrounding the race, you begin to realize that, wait a second, this wasn't this historical landslide victory that some people are claiming. And in fact, in some areas, there are major warning signs for Democrats later this year. Now, again, a win is a win, especially for a referendum. It does not matter if you win by a point or if you win by 25 points. A win is a win, especially for a referendum. With that being said, however, the more you look at the results, the more it becomes apparent that, yeah, Democrats got their victory, and barring some legal stuff that could occur at the Supreme Court, again, we don't know for sure how that's going to go. Maybe the Supreme Court of Virginia, they strike down the map for being illegal. We shall see, I guess. But even with this victory, you look at the detailed results in the context of the race, it becomes apparent that this wasn't the significant victory that Democrats really thought it was going to be. And in fact, you could argue that even though they got the victory, the underlying results, they're kind of a disappointment. I know that sounds crazy because, yeah, you get 4 congressional districts. What's the big deal? Well, look at the final margin. Yes, won, but not by 10 or 15 points. It won by 3. And really, that's rounded up. It's like 2.99 or whatever. So, yeah, it is technically 3 when you round up. But in reality, this was within 3 points in Virginia. Now, Virginia is not a safe Democrat state. I'm not saying it's like New York or California, but it still leaned to the left. In 2024, Harris won the Commonwealth by what? 5.5 points? Yeah, she won it by 5.7% in 2024. So it does lean to the left. And this was an environment that Trump did pretty good everywhere else. You could argue in Virginia, Trump still kind of underperformed. Yeah, he got it within 5.5 points, but compared to other states, he kind of had a bad performance in Virginia. So Virginia does lean to the left. And that's why these results, even though a win is a win, the more you look at, the more you realize it is a disappointment. You would have thought with Virginia leaning to the left and other stuff as well, this should have been yes plus 5 at the bare minimum. That's what most people thought. Worst case scenario, yes plus 5. Most people were claiming yes plus 10, and I said yes plus 15 because I really thought with it being a referendum in April, I thought, and most people did also, it was going to be a blowout. It wasn't. It was within 3 points. A win's a win, of course, but guys, we're not talking about Pennsylvania where it's a 50-50 state that it goes down the wire every year. This is Virginia. It leans to the left. And especially after 2025, may I remind everybody that Democrats killed the Republican Party in Virginia in 2025. Spanberger won by 15 points just like 4 months ago, 5 months ago. She won by 15 points over Winsome Sears. And I know Sears was a weak candidate. We all know this. Really, the entire ticket was bad. But still, she won by over 15 points against the lieutenant governor. It was a blowout. But just a couple months later, Spanberger goes from winning the governorship by 15 to Democrats winning the referendum by only 3 points. That is not a tiny 1-point drop off. You're talking about a 13-point shift in just 6 months. That is very significant. Now, I know I said this in the past that in 2025, these results, in my opinion, they were very fluky. We said this back in November. Guys, the government shutdown alone inflated the Democrat margin by a lot. Not by 15 points or whatever, but it probably took a D plus 10 race, a race that probably would have resulted in Miras winning the AG race, and made it D plus 15 with all the SNAP benefits expiring, everyone losing their minds. Yeah, it probably was like D plus 10 without the shutdown. But with the shutdown, you cannot argue that, yeah, that inflated the margin by like 5 points. So these results, I get it, it's kind of fluky, but even then, everyone kind of thought that you ignore that. Virginia's kind of just gone for Republicans. It's been for a while. Yeah, Youngkin won in 21, but it's clear that was a fluke. That was not sustainable. And really, it was not sustainable after the last couple of years in Virginia, where the Republican Party just failed to capitalize on their victory. But either way, you get the point that, yeah, Virginia, it's been kind of gone for a while now. But after 2025, everyone thought it's just gone forever. And I still think it is. And that's because of one issue that has plagued Virginia for decades now, Nova. In particular, these federal workers. They have become a big problem. They already were a huge problem. But after the first year of Trump's administration, it's clear that, yeah, these voters, they're already very Democrat. They've gotten even more Democrat because Trump in the last year has been firing a bunch of these federal workers. We're not talking about just a couple thousand. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of these people. They're gone. And they live in Loudoun, Prince William, Fairfax. That was always the concern with firing all these people. And that's why I thought, and still do, that Virginia's gone because these federal workers, they were already super Democrat. Now you fire all of them. What do you think's going to happen? These people, they're going to be even more Democrat than they were. And in fact, in the referendum, we actually saw this play out. You can argue the only reason this referendum even succeeded was because of the voters in Loudoun County, Fairfax, Prince William. Look at this. Look at the swing map compared to 2024. The entirety of Virginia, outside of some select areas, swung significantly to the right. Like, look at some of these parts of southwestern Virginia. These areas were already like R plus 80, and they swung 7 points to the right, 10 points, 8 points, 8 points, 9, 6, across the board. It was a very significant swing. Some areas swung even less, like Virginia Beach, but still, Virginia Beach swung 3.5 points to the right. Now, you could argue maybe this wasn't enough, fine, but really, what caused No to win, based on what we're seeing right now, is what happened in Nova. Yeah, the rest of the state swung big time to the right, but take a guess what part of the Commonwealth swung to the left. Nova, Prince William County, a very large county with roughly 145,000 votes, swung 8 points to the left. Loudoun County swung 5 points to the left. Fairfax, 380,000 voters, it swung 4 points to the left. That right there is why, in large part, this referendum succeeded. If it wasn't for these wild swings in Nova, it probably still does pass, but not by 3 points, which I would still say is a disappointment. But instead of passing by 3, it passes by 1 or 2. Does no one see the issue with this? Democrats fell apart with basically every single demographic, every single group in the entirety of the Commonwealth, except for white federal workers in Nova. That's about it. There were some groups across the state that I guess did swing to the left. It's not just every county in Nova swung left, and that's it. There were a couple here and there that did slightly move to the left. But in reality, most of the swings that did occur to the left, they occurred in Nova. And funny enough, take a guess what part of the state had the lowest turnout comparatively. Nova. Funny how that works, by the way. We've been saying for a while now that Democrats benefit from low turnout. Well, the areas that had the lowest turnout on average, they swung to the left. The areas with the highest turnout, they swung to the right. Even within Nova, we saw some of this occurring. So what does that tell you? It should tell you that, yeah, Democrats, they would have won the referendum probably either way, but the reason it was even D+3 and not D+1 or whatever was because of these federal workers getting fired and impacting places like Fairfax and Prince William and Loudoun counties. Of course, that's not the only reason. I would argue that's a significant reason. These people were already left leaning in the first place. Now you start firing a bunch of them, you impact these areas. Yeah, they become even more left leaning. They become even more Democrat friendly. And with lower turnout, these people make up larger shares of the vote in places like Loudoun County. And that's what probably occurred. But it wasn't just that. If that alone should be a big warning sign for Democrats, because outside of places like Virginia and like Maryland, these federal workers, they're not a significant portion of the vote. Really anywhere. There's some here and there, of course, but outside of Virginia and Maryland, they're not this critical voting bloc that can decide elections like this. Well, that's not good for Democrats, because if they have to rely solely on federal workers for these type of swings, again, there are some exceptions to this rule. I get that. Even in Nova, there were some groups that swung more to the left. But again, you could argue that was a turnout thing, because Nova, relatively speaking, had lower turnout than the rest of the Commonwealth. Comparatively, of course. I'm not saying they had 1% turnout. I'm just saying compared to 2025, their turnout was comparatively lower than the rest of the Commonwealth. That's noteworthy. And it's not good for Democrats that they need these federal workers, because if they need these workers to barely win Virginia by 3, what do you think's going to happen in North Carolina or Pennsylvania or Georgia? This becomes a much larger problem for Democrats the more you look at it. They won because these federal workers swung heavy to the left because they got fired. That's what really occurred here. If it wasn't for that, they probably still would have won, but barely. And by the way, I didn't even mention the fact that the wording of the referendum was so slanted towards yes. Even many Democrats have to admit, this is insane. You cannot say we have to restore fairness or whatever. That alone probably also inflated results in some areas with some voters. They weren't really paying attention and they showed up to vote anyways, and they see the wording. They don't actually see what the map looks like, and they must expect, oh, it's just a generic referendum on redistricting. Sure. How much of that happened here? Makes you really wonder. So that alone possibly shifted the race to a point where this probably fails if the referendum was actually worded fairly. Not, oh, we got to ensure fairness. No, word it better. Word it with reality, not, oh, we got to restore fairness to our elections. And also, a reminder that Democrats significantly outspent Republicans in this race. Even though Republicans have infinite money, we're talking hundreds of millions of dollars just sitting there. I think it's 800 million now. Democrats don't even have 250 million across the entire party. Yet for whatever reason, Democrats were able to outspend Republicans. Look at this. The main Democrat pro-redistricting group, Virginians for Fair Elections, raised over $64 million in cash and in-kind contributions. That $64 million. Meanwhile, the main Republican anti-redistricting group raised more than $24 million. Yeah. Now, the RNC did later claim that, oh, they spent a total of roughly $40 million and Democrat groups spent $65 million. That's what they're claiming after the referendum. But still, Democrats, even though Republicans have a cash advantage, significantly outspent Republicans on this race. They threw everything at this race. They had bullshit wording on the referendum. They outspent Republicans by tens of millions of dollars. You had people like Obama barnstorming Virginia, talking about this 24/7. Yet with all that factored in, they still only won by 3. Now you begin to realize, yeah, this was a win for Democrats. A win is a win, especially for referendums. But if you're the Democrat Party, your takeaway should be, we have problems here. We only won because this one demographic in Nova. You cannot rely on these people just across the board. In Virginia and Maryland, sure. But even then, you still underperformed. Even with these voters in Nova, you underperformed by 2. And that doesn't even mention the 13-point shift just from 2025, just 5 months ago, compared to today. You add all of this up and you realize, yeah, Republicans, they lost, that they should have spent more money here. If they would have spent more money here, they probably would have won. They probably would have won by a point or so. Meanwhile, Democrats, they had everything going for them in a Democrat-leaning state, a state they just won in a landslide a couple months ago. You have everything going for you. These federal workers are pissed off with Trump. Nova as a whole is done with them. They hate his guts even more now. You have everything going for you. The Republican Party is allegedly historically unpopular. The Republican base is dead, all this other crap, and you still barely win. And with it being this close to a victory, the wording alone probably was the difference. If it was worded with some kind of integrity, this probably fails. And there's a chance, even though Democrats spend all this money and time on this race, the Virginia Supreme Court could still throw it out. Not saying it's going to happen, but with everything that happened here, there's a chance. Anyways, folks, thank you so much for watching. If you guys did enjoy, smash the like button down below, subscribe, share with your friends, and of course, join the channel today. Godspeed to all of you.